The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, and it changed everything. Admiral Han Doyon was sitting in his office at Earth's United Defense Command when the transmission came through. It was short, cold, and left no room for doubt. The Dravani hegemony, the most powerful empire in the known galaxy, had given humanity a simple choice: submit and become a vassal species, or refuse and be destroyed. They had 90 days to decide. Doyon read the message 3 times, then he closed his eyes and sat in silence for a full minute. He was not a man who panicked. He had commanded Earth's fleet for 12 years, and in that time he had dealt with border skirmishes, pirate raids, and one very ugly incident near the moons of Jupiter. But this was different. This was extinction. Humanity had only been traveling among the stars for 70 years. In the grand scale of the galaxy, they were infants. The Dravani hegemony had existed for thousands of years. They controlled 12 species, hundreds of star systems, and a fleet so large that Earth's entire navy would not even count as a rounding error in their records. Their military doctrine was considered perfect. Their grand tactician, a being called Vorel, had fought and won over 200 campaigns without a single defeat. He was not just a commander, he was a legend. And now he was coming for Earth. Doyon called a meeting that same afternoon. He gathered the 4 people he trusted most in the entire world. The first was Yoon Nari, the Director of Intelligence. She was a thin woman with sharp eyes and a mind that never stopped working. She had spent her career studying alien civilizations, learning how they thought, how they communicated, and most importantly, how they made mistakes. The second was Baek Jiwoo, the combat commander. Jiwoo was loud, fierce, and absolutely fearless. She had once rammed a pirate cruiser with her own ship because she ran out of missiles and refused to retreat. The third was Cho Eun-ji, the head of cyber warfare. Eun-ji was quiet and small and looked like she would be more comfortable in a library than a war room. But she could break into any system in the galaxy and make it do whatever she wanted. The fourth was Shin Tae-ho, Earth's chief diplomatic envoy. Tae-ho was handsome, charming, and had a smile that made people trust him completely. This was useful because almost nothing he said was ever entirely true. They sat around the table, and Doyon laid out the situation. He did not soften it. He showed them the numbers. The Dravani fleet outnumbered Earth's ships 15-1. Their weapons were more advanced, their ships were faster, their shields were stronger, and their commander had never lost. The room was quiet for a long time. Jiwoo spoke first. She wanted to fight. She always wanted to fight. She argued that Earth's soldiers were brave and determined, and that courage could make up for the difference in numbers. Doyon respected her passion, but he shook his head. Courage was wonderful, but it did not stop plasma cannons. Tae-ho suggested diplomacy. Perhaps they could negotiate better terms, delay the invasion, buy time. But Doyon pointed out that the Dravani did not negotiate with species they considered inferior. To them, offering vassalage was already generous. They expected gratitude, not bargaining. Eun-ji said nothing. She simply pulled up a display showing the technical specifications of the Dravani fleet, and let the numbers speak for themselves. Every metric was worse for humanity: speed, firepower, armor, numbers, experience. There was not a single category where Earth had an advantage. Then Nari spoke. She had been quiet through the entire discussion, watching and listening. When she finally opened her mouth, everyone turned to look at her. She said something that changed the course of the war before it even started. She said they could not outfight the Dravani. They could not outrun them. They could not outbuild them or outgun them. But they could outlie them. The room went silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of people who were starting to understand something. Nari explained. She had spent years studying the Dravani. They were a deeply logical species. Their entire civilization was built on order, reason, and perfect information. They did not lie, not because they were moral, but because they considered deception to be primitive, beneath them, a tool used by animals and savages. Their military strategy was built on gathering perfect data, analyzing it with perfect logic, and executing with perfect precision. It had worked for thousands of years because every species they had ever fought played by the same rules. Everyone tried to hide their forces. Yes, everyone used camouflage and ambush. But no one had ever tried to actively feed the Dravani false information on a massive scale. No one had ever tried to make them believe things that were completely untrue. Because no other species in the galaxy had ever needed to lie the way humans did. Nari pointed out something that everyone in the room already knew, but had never thought about in this way. Humans had been lying to each other since the beginning of their existence. They lied in war, in business, in love, in politics. They had built entire professions around deception. Spies, magicians, con artists, diplomats, lawyers, poker players. Humans had fought wars where the most important weapon was not a gun, but a fake army made of rubber tanks. They had won battles by making the enemy look the wrong way. They had survived for thousands of years, not by being the strongest animal on their planet, but by being the most clever and the most dishonest. This, Nari said, was their advantage, the only one they had, and she intended to use it. She called her plan Operation Mirage. The idea was simple in concept, but enormous in scale. They would build an entire false picture of humanity's military strength and feed it to the Dravani through every channel they could find. Fake fleets, fake weapons, fake communications, fake research, fake everything. They would make the Dravani believe they were facing an enemy far more powerful and far more dangerous than the small, frightened species that actually existed. Doyun listened to the whole plan without interrupting. When Nari finished, he looked around the table. Jiwoo was grinning. Taeho was already thinking about his role. Eunji was running calculations in her head. Everyone understood. This was insane. This was desperate. And this was the only chance they had. Doyun stood up and looked at the star map on the wall. Somewhere out there, the most powerful fleet in the galaxy was preparing to wipe humanity from existence. And Earth's only defense was going to be the oldest human skill of all. He turned to Nari and gave her the order. "Make them believe everything," he said. "Everything except the truth." Cho Eunji had not slept in 4 days, and she had never been happier. She sat in the heart of Earth's cyber warfare command, surrounded by screens and data streams, and she was building the greatest lie ever told. Her job was to make the Dravani hegemony believe that humanity was 10 times more powerful than it actually was, and she was doing it beautifully. It started with the signals. Every military fleet in the galaxy left traces when it moved. Engine heat, communication chatter, gravitational ripples. The Dravani monitored all of these across every sector of human space. They were watching, always watching, gathering data for Grand Tactician Vorel. So Eunji gave them something to see. She built ghost fleets. Using a network of small satellites hidden inside asteroid fields, she created the signal signatures of over 300 warships that did not exist. Each satellite broadcast engine heat, shield fluctuations, and weapons charge patterns that perfectly matched the profile of heavy battle cruisers. To any sensor, they looked completely real. She placed them in formations across human space, moving them in patterns that suggested a massive, well-organized defense force. But Eunji knew that signals alone would not be enough. The Dravani were thorough. They would cross-reference every piece of data. So she hacked into civilian shipping networks and planted false cargo records showing massive deliveries of weapons-grade materials to secret military shipyards. She created fake research papers about experimental weapons programs. She even planted false communications between human military officers discussing fleet deployments, weapons tests, and strategic planning. Every message was carefully written to sound real, complete with typing mistakes and casual language. Every message was a lie. The most important lie was the big one, the graviton cascade device. Nari had designed this fiction herself. The idea was to make the Dravani believe that Earth possessed a weapon capable of collapsing a star. It was physically impossible with human technology, but the Dravani did not know that. Yunji created an entire false research trail, doctored energy readings near Earth's sun, fake scientific publications and encrypted databases that the Dravani were known to access, staged construction activity around a facility on Mercury's dark side. Everything pointed to one conclusion. The humans had built something terrible and they were afraid to use it. While Yunji worked her magic with data and signals, Shin Tae-ho was performing on a very different stage. He arrived at the Dravani capital aboard a small diplomatic shuttle, wearing his best suit and his most sincere expression. His mission was not to negotiate peace. His mission was to act. Every word he said, every gesture he made, every pause and hesitation had been scripted and rehearsed by Nari's team. He was playing a role, and the entire Dravani leadership was his audience. In his first meeting with the Hegemony's diplomatic council, Tae-ho was nervous and evasive. He stumbled over his words. He glanced at his aide when certain topics came up. He asked for breaks at strange moments. To the Dravani, he looked like a man carrying a heavy secret that he was struggling to keep hidden. On the second day, during a private dinner with a senior Dravani official, Tae-ho drank too much of the alien wine. His words became loose. He mentioned, almost in passing, a weapon that Earth had developed, something terrible. He caught himself immediately, changed the subject, and looked frightened. The Dravani official reported the conversation to his superiors within the hour. Exactly as Nari had planned. On the third day, Tae-ho's personal communication device was briefly left unattended during a recess. A Dravani intelligence agent copied its contents. Inside, they found encrypted messages referencing something called Project Sunfall. The encryption was strong, but not unbreakable. It took the Dravani cryptographers 6 hours to decode it. When they did, they found technical specifications and status reports for a graviton cascade device. Every piece of data on that device had been placed there by Unji. The information traveled up the chain of command until it reached Grand Tactician Varel himself. Varel was old. He had been fighting wars longer than most civilizations had existed. He had conquered species that could bend light, species that could survive in the vacuum of space, species that could communicate across light years with their minds alone. He had seen every trick, every strategy, every desperate gamble a doomed civilization could attempt. And yet, as he sat in his command chamber, reviewing the intelligence from human space, something felt wrong. The data did not make sense. Human fleet movements were irrational. Their defensive positions followed no known strategic doctrine. Ships were scattered in patterns that seemed almost random. Some systems appeared heavily defended, while others, including strategically vital ones, were left wide open. No competent military commander would deploy forces this way. Either the humans were complete fools, or they were doing something Varel did not understand. He called in strategist Uleni, his most gifted student. Uleni was young by Dravani standards, and brilliant in a cold, analytical way. She had studied every species the hegemony had ever fought, and could predict enemy behavior with disturbing accuracy. Varel asked her to analyze the human deployments. Ulen studied the data for 2 days. When she returned, her conclusion was troubling. She told Varel that the human deployments made no logical sense under any known strategic framework. There were only 2 possible explanations. Either the humans had no idea what they were doing, which was possible, but unlikely given their successful survival in a dangerous region of space, or they were deliberately feeding false information to the hegemony's intelligence network. Varel considered this. Then he dismissed it. Deception at this scale was not something any species had ever attempted. It was not just unusual, it was unthinkable. Strategic deception required feeding false information consistently across hundreds of channels for weeks or months without a single mistake. It required an entire civilization to participate in the lie. No species had the cultural disposition, the organizational capability, or the sheer dishonesty required for such an operation. The idea was absurd. Yulin disagreed, but said nothing more. She had learned that Varel listened to logic, not persistence. Meanwhile, Nari was already moving to the next phase. She turned her attention to the 12 vassal species that made up the hegemony. These species had been conquered generations ago, and while they served the Dravani loyally, their loyalty was built on fear, not love. Nari saw an opportunity. Through Yunji's networks, she began planting false communications between human diplomats and leaders of several vassal species. The messages suggested secret negotiations for independence, trade agreements, military alliances, promises of human support if the vassal species rose against their masters. None of these negotiations were real. But the messages were crafted so carefully that they were impossible to dismiss. Paranoia began to spread through the hegemony like a disease. Overlord Kasich, the political ruler of the Dravani, received reports that 3 vassal species were in secret contact with Earth. He ordered investigations. The investigations found more planted evidence. Trust between the Dravani and their subjects began to crack. And while the hegemony turned its eyes inward, searching for traitors that did not exist, Baek Ji-woo was quietly doing the only real military work that mattered. She took Earth's small real fleet and hid it. She scattered her ships behind moons, inside dense asteroid belts, and in the sensor shadows of gas giants. She ran silent drills, practiced precision maneuvers, and prepared her crews for the one moment when they would have to fight for real. On the surface, human space looked chaotic and confusing. Beneath the surface, everything was exactly where Nari wanted it. Varel stood in his command chamber, surrounded by star charts covered in contradictory data. He had fought 200 campaigns. He had never hesitated before an attack. But something about these humans made him pause. He turned to Ulen and said quietly that he did not understand these creatures. Ulen looked at him, but offered no comfort. She was beginning to think that was exactly the point. The Dravani Armada entered human space on the 47th day, and it was the most terrifying thing anyone on Earth had ever seen. Over 6,000 warships crossed the border in perfect formation. They moved like a single living thing, each vessel holding its position with a precision that no human fleet could ever match. At the center of the formation sat the flagship of Grand Tactician Vorel, a ship so large that it had its own gravitational pull. Sensor stations across human space lit up with warnings. Emergency broadcasts filled every channel. Civilians on the outer colonies looked up at the sky and prayed. Vorel expected resistance at the border. Every species he had ever conquered had tried to make a stand at the edge of their territory. It was predictable. He had already planned exactly how he would break through whatever defensive line the humans had assembled. But there was no defensive line. There was nothing. Human space was empty. The ghost fleets that Unji had created were still broadcasting their signals, but they were scattered in nonsensical positions. Some systems appeared to be surrendering. Others were broadcasting aggressive threats. One system was playing music on a military frequency. Nothing was consistent. Nothing followed any pattern that Vorel's tactical algorithms could process. He slowed the advance. This was not a decision he made lightly. Vorel had never slowed an advance in his entire career. Speed was the foundation of Dravani military doctrine. You identified the enemy, you calculated the optimal attack vector, and you struck with overwhelming force before they could react. Hesitation was weakness. But the complete absence of any recognizable defense pattern made him uncomfortable in a way he could not articulate. He sent 3 scout flotillas ahead to probe the inner systems. The first flotilla entered a system near the edge of human space and immediately detected a massive weapons platform orbiting the 4th planet. Its sensor profile showed heavy plasma batteries, shield generators of a type the Dravani had never seen, and an energy core powerful enough to threaten capital ships. The flotilla commander reported the contact and pulled back. The second flotilla found 2 more weapons platforms in an adjacent system. The third flotilla found another one blocking a key navigation corridor. In reality, these weapons platforms were hollowed-out asteroids. Cho-Un-ji had fitted them with sensor-spoofing emitters that projected false energy signatures. They had no weapons, they had no shields. A single missile would have turned them to dust. But, on a sensor screen, they looked like the deadliest things in the galaxy. Vorel received the scout reports and felt something he had not felt in a very long time: doubt. The humans appeared to have weapons technology that the Hegemony's intelligence division had not predicted. The Graviton Cascade device, these unknown weapons platforms, fleet deployments that defied all logic. Every piece of data he received added to the confusion rather than reducing it. Back on the Dravani capital, Overlord Kasich was watching the campaign through live data feeds, and he was not happy. He had expected the invasion of human space to take less than a week. Instead, his grand tactician had stopped moving. Kasich sent a direct order to Vorel: press the attack immediately. Do not stop until Earth is under Dravani control. Vorel refused. He sent a message back to Kasich, explaining that the tactical situation was unclear, and that committing the full fleet without reliable intelligence would be reckless. Kasich responded with fury. He accused Vorel of cowardice. Vorel responded with cold professionalism. The exchange was intercepted by 3 vassal species intelligence services, and by the end of the day, everyone in the hegemony knew that the military and political leadership were fighting with each other. This was exactly what Nari had predicted. She had studied the relationship between Vorel and Kasich for months. She knew that Kasich was impatient and paranoid, and that Vorel was proud and stubborn. She knew that the longer the invasion took, the more pressure Kasich would put on Vorel, and the more Vorel would resist. The conflict between them would paralyze the Dravani command structure. All she had to do was keep the confusion going. Shin Taeho made his next move. He sent an emergency diplomatic communication to the Dravani Council, requesting an immediate summit. He claimed that Earth was willing to discuss terms of surrender, but only if the Dravani halted their advance for 48 hours as a gesture of good faith. The Dravani Council erupted into argument. Some members believed the offer was genuine and wanted to accept. Why risk lives when the humans were ready to submit? Others, led by Kasich, believed it was a trap designed to buy time. Vorel, who should have made the military decision, was caught between his own uncertainty and his conflict with Kasich. The debate lasted 3 full days. 3 days during which the most powerful fleet in the galaxy sat motionless in human space, doing nothing. Baek Ji-woo used every one of those 72 hours. While the Dravani argued among themselves, she moved Earth's real fleet, every ship, every fighter, every armed shuttle. She pulled them from their hiding places and assembled them in a single concentrated strike formation behind the sensor shadow of a binary star system called Pale Crescent. It was the one place in the region where the gravitational interference from 2 stars orbiting each other created a natural blind spot in any sensor array. Ji-woo's fleet was small. Compared to the Dravani Armada, it was almost laughably small. But it was real, it was well-trained, and it was hidden exactly where it needed to be. Then Nari played her most dangerous card. She had Unji broadcast a fake emergency communication on a military frequency that the Dravani were known to monitor. In the broadcast, a panicked voice identified itself as a senior officer reporting to Admiral Do-yun. The officer said that the graviton cascade device was armed and ready. He was requesting final authorization to activate it. Do-yun's voice responded, calm but strained, authorizing the activation. Then the signal was cut short, as if someone had jammed it. The implication was clear. Earth was preparing to destroy its own sun. The resulting explosion would wipe out everything within several light-years, including the Dravani fleet. Vorel did not believe it. He had considered the possibility of a human doomsday weapon, and had concluded that no rational species would destroy itself to take an enemy with it. It was illogical. It was insane. But Overlord Kasich was not a military strategist. He was a politician. And politicians understood one thing above all else: self-preservation. When the intercepted communication reached him, Kasich panicked. He sent a direct order, bypassing Vorel entirely, commanding all capital ships and fleet carriers to withdraw immediately from the Sol system to a safe distance. Vorel was furious. He tried to countermand the order, but Kasich had sent it on the Overlord's priority channel, which outranked even a grand tactician in wartime. Half of the Dravani fleet began to pull back. The massive armada, the most powerful military force in the galaxy, split in two. The forward element, mostly medium cruisers and patrol ships, remained in human space. The heavy capital ships, the real strength of the fleet, retreated. Strategist Yulene watched the fleet divide on her tactical display. She felt sick. She turned to Vorel and told him that the humans had done this deliberately. Every step, every lie, every piece of false intelligence had been designed to reach this exact moment. The moment when the Dravani fleet was broken in half. Vorel knew she was right. He knew it in his bones. His fleet was divided. His chain of command was fractured, and somewhere in the darkness of human space, something was waiting. Admiral Han Do-yun stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the Dravani fleet fracture on his tactical display. The forward element was isolated. The capital ships were running. The greatest military force in the galaxy had been torn apart by nothing more than words, signals, and carefully crafted fear. He looked at Jiwoo on the communication screen. Her eyes were bright. Her hands were steady. Her fleet was ready. Do-yun gave a single word: now. The Battle of the Pale Crescent began at 03:47 hours, and it was over before most of the Dravani fleet understood what was happening. Baek Jiwoo's ships came out of the binary star's shadow like wolves emerging from a forest at night. They moved fast. They moved quiet, and they moved together. Every captain knew exactly where to go and exactly what to hit. There was no hesitation. There was no confusion. There was only the cold, precise violence of a force that knew it had one chance and could not afford to waste a single shot. The Dravani forward element was not expecting an attack. How could they be? Their sensors showed human ships scattered randomly across a dozen systems. Their intelligence said Earth's fleet was disorganized and poorly equipped. Every piece of data they had told them that the humans were weak and divided. None of that data was real, but they did not know that yet. Jiwoo's first targets were the communication relay ships. These were the vessels that linked the forward element to Vorel's command ship and to the retreating capital fleet. They were lightly armed and lightly armored, because no one had ever bothered to attack communication ships before. In Dravani warfare, destroying communications infrastructure was considered wasteful. You won by defeating the enemy's combat vessels, not by cutting their ability to talk. Jiwoo destroyed 14 relay ships in the first 11 minutes. The forward element went blind. Captains who had been receiving orders from Vorel's command suddenly found themselves in silence. They switched to backup frequencies. Cho Eun-ji was waiting on every single one. Eun-ji had spent weeks mapping the Dravani communication network. She knew their primary frequencies, their backup frequencies, their emergency frequencies, and the personal channels that senior officers used when they thought no one was listening. The moment Jiwoo knocked out the relays, Eunji launched her cyber attack. She did not try to jam the Dravani communications. Jamming was obvious and could be worked around. Instead, she did something much worse. She flooded the network with false orders. Some ships received commands to advance toward Earth. Others received commands to retreat to the capital. A group of cruisers received orders to hold position and wait for reinforcements. A destroyer squadron received an emergency alert that the graviton cascade device had been activated, and that all ships should jump to hyperspace immediately. Every order carried the correct encryption codes, the correct authorization signatures, and the correct formatting. They looked completely real, and they all contradicted each other. The Dravani forward fleet dissolved into chaos. Ships that had been flying in perfect formation began moving in different directions. Captains tried to contact each other to verify orders and found that their neighbors had received completely different instructions. Some ships obeyed their orders and moved. Others stopped and waited for clarification that never came. Two destroyers, operating on contradictory commands, nearly collided. A cruiser, believing it had been ordered to engage in enemy contact, opened fire on a friendly patrol ship. Into this chaos, Jiwoo drove her fleet like a knife. She had divided her forces into 4 strike groups, each with a specific list of targets. Strike Group 1 hit the Dravani sensor ships, blinding what was left of their detection network. Strike Group 2 targeted the fleet's supply vessels, destroying fuel and ammunition stores that would take months to replace. Strike Group 3 engaged the medium cruisers, drawing them into close-range battles where Earth's smaller, more agile ships had an advantage. And Strike Group 4, led by Jiwoo personally, went straight for the command vessels. The Dravani were better armed. Their shields were stronger. Their weapons hit harder. In a fair fight, one-on-one, a Dravani cruiser would destroy a human warship in minutes. But this was not a fair fight. This was an ambush conducted against a confused, disoriented enemy that could not communicate, could not coordinate, and could not tell the difference between real orders and fake ones. Every advantage the Dravani had was built on information, coordination, and discipline. Eunji had taken away their information. Jiwoo had destroyed their coordination, and the panic spreading through their fleet was eating away at their discipline. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 30% of the Dravani forward element had been destroyed or disabled. Another 20% had scattered into deep space, following false retreat orders that Eunji had sent them. The rest had managed to form a rough defensive cluster, but they were damaged, confused, and cut off from their command structure. Varel received news of the battle through a scout ship that had been outside the combat zone. He listened to the report in absolute silence. When it was finished, he sat still for a very long time. Then he did something he had never done in 200 campaigns. He ordered a retreat. The word spread through the surviving Dravani fleet like a physical shock. Retreat. Grand Tactician Varel, who had never lost a battle, who had never taken a single step backward, was pulling back. Ships that had been fighting to hold their positions disengaged and began moving toward the rendezvous point. The retreat was orderly and professional, because Varel's crews were still the best-trained soldiers in the galaxy. But it was a retreat, and everyone knew what it meant. As the Dravani fleet withdrew, Varel sat in his command chamber and began to think. He was not angry. Anger was an emotion for those who did not understand what had happened to them. Varel understood perfectly. He had been deceived, not in a small way, not a simple ambush or a hidden fleet. He had been deceived on every level, through every channel, from the very first moment his intelligence services had begun gathering data on the humans. Everything had been a lie. The ghost fleets, the weapons platforms, the graviton cascade device, the scattered deployments, the diplomatic overtures, the surrenders, and the threats. Every single piece of information that had entered the Dravani intelligence system had been carefully crafted by human hands to create a picture of reality that did not exist. And Vorel, who prided himself on his ability to see through any strategy, had built his entire campaign plan on a foundation of fiction. Strategist Yuleni came to him after the retreat was complete. She did not say that she had warned him. She did not need to. Instead, she laid out what she had been working on for the past several weeks. She had been quietly cataloging every piece of intelligence from human space and testing each one for authenticity. Her findings were devastating. Over 90% of the data that Dravani had collected about human military capabilities was false. The real human fleet was a fraction of what the Dravani had believed. The weapons platforms were fakes. The graviton cascade device did not exist. The humans had beaten the greatest military force in the galaxy with nothing but lies. Yuleni told Vorel that she had begun to understand the human methodology. They built lies on top of lies, creating layers of deception that reinforced each other. If you peeled away one layer, you found another lie underneath, and beneath that, another. They lied with data, with words, with behavior, with silence. They lied by telling partial truths that led to false conclusions. They even lied by telling the truth in contexts where it would be interpreted as a lie. She proposed a counter-strategy. She believed she could build an intelligence framework capable of detecting and filtering human deception. It would take time, but she was confident it could be done. Vorel listened. Then he asked her how she planned to defeat an enemy whose greatest weapon was invisible. Back on Earth, the celebrations were loud and joyful. Humanity had just won its first major engagement against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. People danced in the streets. News networks played footage of the Dravani retreat on repeat. Politicians gave speeches about human courage and determination. Admiral Han Do-yoon did not celebrate. Neither did Yoon Nari. They sat together in the war room, looking at the strategic display. The Dravani fleet had retreated, but it had not been destroyed. Vorel had lost ships, but he still had thousands more. And now he knew how the humans fought. The element of surprise was gone. The lies that had worked once would not work again. Nari said it plainly. They had hurt the Dravani. They had not beaten them. Vorel was still alive. His fleet was still enormous. And now he was going to adapt. Do-yoon nodded. He had expected this. He asked Nari what came next. Nari stared at the display for a long time. Somewhere across the galaxy, she knew Vorel was studying human history, learning about their wars, their tricks, their ancient art of deception. He was preparing for the next round, and when he came back, he would not make the same mistakes. She told Do-yoon that they needed something new, something that Vorel could never predict, no matter how much he studied, something impossible. Do-yoon asked what that was. Nari did not answer. But in her mind, an idea was beginning to form. An idea so simple and so insane that it just might work. An idea that would turn everything Vorel had learned against him. In his command chamber, light years away, Vorel sat alone and read about the Trojan War, about D-Day, about Operation Bodyguard and the Ghost Army. He read about a species that had been lying to each other for 10,000 years. And for the first time in his very long life, the greatest military mind in the galaxy felt something close to fear. 6 months passed. The galaxy held its breath. Grand Tactician Vorel used every one of those months. He rebuilt his fleet. He reorganized his command structure. He removed Overlord Kasik's ability to issue direct military orders. A political battle that was almost as brutal as the real war. And most importantly, he changed the way his entire military thought about information. He created a new division within his intelligence service, led by strategist Yulen. Its sole purpose was to detect and dismantle human deception. Yulen built analytical models, verification protocols, and cross-referencing systems designed to test every piece of data that came from human space. No signal was trusted. No communication was taken at face value. Every sensor reading was checked against physical laws to see if it was possible. Every intercepted message was analyzed for the subtle patterns that Unji's forgeries might contain. Vorel himself spent weeks studying human history. He read about Sun Tzu, about Hannibal, about the great intelligence operations of human wars. He studied how humans used misdirection, how they planted false evidence, how they manipulated perception and expectation. By the end of his study, he believed he understood the human mind better than any alien in history. His new doctrine was simple. Assume everything from the humans is false. Trust nothing. Verify everything. If the data says the humans are weak, assume they are strong. If the data says they are strong, assume it is a trick. Fight the war based on your own capabilities, not on what the enemy shows you. It was a brilliant adaptation. In any normal war, it would have been unbeatable. But Yun-Nari was not fighting a normal war. She had been preparing, too. She knew Vorel would come back smarter, more careful, and more dangerous. She knew the old tricks were dead. Ghost fleets, fake weapons, planted communications. Vorel would see through all of it now. She needed something entirely new. Something that would use Vorel's own adaptation against him. And she found it. She called it Operation Looking Glass. When she explained it to Do-Yun and the others, the room went completely silent. Jiwoo stared at her. Taeho blinked several times. Unji tilted her head like she was running calculations. Do-Yun just listened, his face unreadable. The plan was this. Tell the Dravani the complete truth. Every human ship position, every weapon system, every weakness, every vulnerability, every gap in the defense, all of it, broadcasted openly, handed directly to Vorel. The reasoning was elegant and terrifying. Vorel had trained himself to believe that everything from the humans was a lie. He had built an entire intelligence apparatus around this assumption. His new doctrine was built on one core belief. The humans will always try to deceive you. So if the humans told him the truth, he would automatically reject it. He would look at the real data and assume it was the most sophisticated deception yet. He would then try to figure out what the real situation was, and in doing so, he would construct a false picture of reality entirely by himself. The truth would become the lie, not because the humans made it a lie, but because Vorel would refuse to believe it. Do-Yun approved the plan. Shin Taeho was sent to deliver the information. He requested a face-to-face meeting with Vorel himself, which was unusual. Diplomatic envoys normally met with councils and advisors, not military commanders. But Taeho insisted, and Vorel, curious about the humans who had humiliated him, agreed. They met on a neutral station at the border of human space. Taeho came alone. Vorel came with Ulene and a security detail. They sat across from each other in a bare room with a single table between them. Taeho did not smile. He did not perform. For the first time in his career as a diplomat, he was not acting. He placed a data chip on the table and slid it across to Vorel. He said it contained the complete disposition of Earth's military forces. Every ship, every station, every weapon. He said it was the truth. Vorel looked at the data chip. Then he looked at Taeho. Then he looked at Ulene. Ulene took the chip and analyzed its contents right there at the table. What she found was shocking. According to the data, Earth's real military was pathetically small. A few hundred ships, most of them outdated. No superweapon, no hidden fleets, no secret technology. The picture it painted was of a civilization that had won its first battle entirely through bluff and trickery, and now had almost nothing left. Vorel studied the data for a long time. Then, he dismissed it. He told Tejo that this was the most clever deception yet. He said that presenting false weakness was a classic human strategy, designed to make the Dravani overconfident and careless. He said he would not fall for it. Tejo said nothing. He simply nodded, collected his things, and left. On the shuttle ride home, Tejo contacted Nari. He told her that Vorel had rejected the data completely. Nari closed her eyes and smiled. The trap was set. Vorel launched his second invasion 2 weeks later. His fleet was larger than before, better organized, and operating under his new doctrine of total distrust. He analyzed the data Tejo had given him, and concluded that the real human fleet was hidden in the locations that the data said were empty. The areas marked as undefended were obviously where the humans had concentrated their true strength. The weakness was a mask. It had to be. He split his fleet accordingly. He sent massive task forces to the empty sectors where he believed the hidden human fleet was waiting. He committed his best ships to attack positions in systems where there was nothing to find. He spread his armada across a dozen star systems, each one chasing a threat that existed only in his own mind. The real human fleet was exactly where the data said it would be. Baek Jiwoo had been waiting for this moment for 6 months. She had trained her crews relentlessly. She had drilled every maneuver until it was second nature. And now, as the Dravani fleet scattered itself across human space looking for ghosts, she struck. The attacks came fast and from everywhere. Jiwoo had positioned strike groups along the routes that the Dravani task forces would have to take. As each task force entered a system expecting to find hidden human battle groups, they instead found themselves ambushed by concentrated human forces. The Dravani ships were strong, but they were operating in small, isolated groups, far from mutual support. Jiwoo's forces hit them one by one, in rapid sequence, never giving them time to regroup or call for help. Unji was there too, running the same playbook, but with new variations. She jammed real communications and let the fake ones through. She created false distress signals that drew Dravani rescue forces into secondary ambushes. She made the chaos total and inescapable. Ulen was the first to understand what had happened. She was aboard Vorel's flagship, watching the battle reports come in when the pattern became clear. She checked the data chip that Tejo had given them. She compared it to the actual positions of the human forces that were now destroying the Dravani fleet, piece by piece. Every ship, every position, every weapon. The humans had told them the exact truth, and the Dravani had refused to believe a single word. Uleni rushed to Vorel's command chamber. She told him that the data was real, all of it. The humans had given them everything, and the Dravani had thrown it away because they were too afraid of being deceived to accept the truth when it was handed to them. Vorel stood motionless. The tactical display around him showed his fleet being torn apart across 12 systems. His perfect doctrine, his adaptation, his counter-strategy, it had all been turned against him. He had not been tricked by a lie. He had been tricked by the truth. The Battle of Shattered Doctrine, as history would call it, lasted 3 days. When it was over, the Dravani had suffered the worst military defeat in their recorded history. Not because human technology was superior, not because human soldiers were braver, but because the greatest military mind in the galaxy had defeated himself. The aftermath came quickly. Overlord Kasich, already weakened by the first defeat, was overthrown. The vassal species, sensing the hegemony's weakness, declared independence one by one. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for millennia began to crack and crumble, not from a single blow, but from the slow poison of doubt that the humans had injected into its foundations. Vorel requested a private meeting with Doyun. It was granted. They sat across from each other in a small room, much like the one where Tejo and Vorel had met weeks earlier. Two commanders, two minds. One had built his career on perfect strategy. The other had built his on the understanding that perfection could be exploited. Vorel asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the battle. How did Doyun know that he would not believe the truth? Doyun looked at him for a long moment. Then he answered simply. He said that they had taught Vorel to fear lies, and once someone fears lies, they can never trust the truth again. That, he said, was the real weapon. Not ships, not technology, not even deception itself. The real weapon was doubt. And once doubt was planted in a mind, that mind would destroy itself. Vorel was silent for a very long time. Then he spoke. He said that his people had built an empire on perfect strategy, that humans had survived by being perfectly dishonest, and that he believed the human gift was the more terrifying one. Doyun did not disagree. In the months that followed, the galaxy reorganized itself. The hegemony dissolved. A new galactic council was formed, with representatives from every species, including the newly freed vassals. Humanity was given a seat, not as a vassal, not as a junior partner, as an equal. They had not earned this seat through military might. Earth's fleet was still small, still outdated, still fragile. They had earned it because every species in the galaxy now understood something fundamental about humans. You could not predict them. You could not trust the information they gave you, even when it was true. You could not build a strategy against them because they did not follow any strategy. They were chaos wrapped in smiles, unpredictability dressed in diplomacy, and they had turned the act of lying into something so refined and so devastating that it had brought down an empire. No one wanted to be the next species to test them. At the ceremony where humanity officially joined the Galactic Council, Admiral Han Doyun stood at the podium and looked out at the assembled representatives of 100 worlds. He gave a short speech about cooperation, peace, and the future. It was warm, sincere, and perfectly delivered. Yunari, watching from the back of the room, smiled to herself. She wondered how much of it was true. And so the galaxy learned what Earth had always known. The greatest weapon was never a fleet or a bomb. It was a smile that meant nothing, a handshake that hid a blade, and a truth so honest that no one in the universe could bring themselves to believe it.